Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. Just a wonderful morning again. I'm Rufai Hosseini.
I'm Adeso Almoron.
And I'm Sheito Atigari.
We'll begin this morning with the recent agreement between the federal government and organized labor. Now, following the agreed consequential adjustment on the new minimum wage, the Federal Executive Council yesterday approved the payment of the new salary structure as contained in the agreement signed last week.
Oh, yeah, according to the FEC, that's a fact. Federal Executive Council new salary structure takes effect from April 18, 2019, with a clearance of arrears to be completed by December 31st, 2019.
Also, the Ministry of Labour and Employment has directed workers across the states to kindly negotiate with their state government for the implementation of the new minimum wage.
And joining us from our Abuja studio is Susegh Akume, public policy enthusiast, spokesman for Abundant Nigeria Renewal Party, ANRP. Good morning, Mr. Akume, and thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Good morning.
Great. Let's begin with comments from organized labor at the retreat on Tuesday. Labor seems to be talking tough, and they are threatening to sue any state government that does not implement this new national minimum wage. And their confidence stems from the fact that the law today is different from that was in 1981 when there were no sanctions attached. But I want to ask you, do you share in this optimism of labor ensuring that the state governors are law-abiding?
I don't share their optimism. I don't share optimism in any of the transactions that went on. I think we've been looking at in the wrong direction, and so we're going to end up where we started in the first place. We just got a report this week by Budget that says that only 3 states out of 36, as a matter of fact, out of 37, including the FCT, are solvent that can run themselves based on their internally generated revenues. Even the federal allocations that they get monthly, how is the federal government running and the government running recurrent expenditure? The current recurrent expenditure, the federal government is borrowing to run recurrent expenditure. That's what the evidence says, even though they deny it. So it's going to be a tough one for states that are not able to pay and are owing. And I think the whole thing, to an extent, turns to a charade. When you hear people like the governor of Benue or Kogi State who are known, and others who are known to owe, even on the old salary structure for years, or pensioners or workers saying that they can't pay the new salary structure, it seems that we're not very serious about it yet. What I think the government could have done is look at long-term solutions to the thing, even mid-term and the immediate term. Even the wage increment that we have now, it's not going to impact much on the people earning it, because we have multidimensional poverty and so much that is already undermining the little amount of money people make. I think that it would have been better looking at all of those and then working towards improving our quality of lives and our standard of living, instead of an increment that there's so many competing needs already that are going to swallow them up.
Mr.
And
Akume,
so the government's policies and directions are everywhere. Yes, please.
all right, Mr. Akume, real quickly, a lot of people say half loaf is better than nothing. It's a good thing you cited that report that says most states, they have to depend on the federal purse to be able to sort this out. But, you know, the big argument the government will make in that stead is, and that's why we're going to be bopping up VAT figures, you know, about 2.5% more to be able to account for this. And the government will also say, oh, the state should be able to go ahead and pay it because any circumstance that will be generated as a result of in terms of inflation has been sorted out, because there was a holistic report by the panel led by Bismarck Rewani as regards this. I mean, what do you say to all of this? That the government will retort and say, I mean, these are old point of view as regards this. So you can't say that this is not sustainable agreements we've had with these people.
The issue can be looked at in different perspectives, but let's just take one or two of them. I repeat that I don't think the government is being honest and sincere about this, because, like I said, the government is even borrowing to pay recurrent expenditure at the federal government itself. Even the allocations that the government makes, it's part of monies that are borrowed. How is the evidence? Look at the income, the revenues that we generate quarter by quarter for the past 2 or 3 years. our recurrent expenditure is more than the revenues. So where is the fallout, the other part coming in? I'm talking about recurrent only. I'm not talking about capital. So we're borrowing to do that. The other side of it, which I also don't agree, is the last month's September Monetary Policy Committee of the CBN. This gave three headwinds that are opposing the growth of our economy. They said it's unemployment, insecurity, and the debt, and the public debt. But we're still getting more debts, which, like I said earlier, we're using to pay recurrent, we're also using to run the system. So the thing is not very, very sustainable. The other side of it, which I tend to agree, is that we waste a lot of money. We waste on things that are frivolous. And so that's the other side where I choose to see that if we cut our wastage and because we live large, we spend monies on things that we shouldn't be doing, then there should be enough to pay people their wages. But I think we should be looking beyond paying people wages. I think we should be working more towards being a society that is more productive, because right now we're not productive. Policies of the government hinder productivity. I think that many of them, and then the other policies undermine their policies that should enhance productivity. The other thing I think that we should do, apart from promoting productivity, is improving our quality of life and standard of living. I think that other policies of the government also hinder that. And so when you get money, increase in income is only one part of the whole thing. Because if you get an increment in money and you spend it and it's of no value to you, then it's a zero-sum game. I think that's where we should be looking at, because right now I'm not sure that 30,000 naira increment minimum wage is going to improve the quality of lives of the workers and every other person, indeed.
Okay, Mr. Akume, we did have the ex-president of the Trade Union Congress, Mr. Peter Sele, on the show a few days ago, and we're talking about the fact that the minimum wage that had been set. A lot of the states had said that they didn't have enough money to even to pay their workers even before the agreement was reached. And one of the points that he made was that some of the state governments did not send representatives during these negotiations to make sure that they were financially buoyant to do so. However, and that putting them in a place where they're not held accountable to pay for these monies. Now, looking at a situation where we had the Paris Bailout Fund and we still aren't able to trace where these monies have gone to. Do you think that in this case, the state governors should be held accountable and should be made to retrack where most of these monies have been spent?
I think I shared that view. That's part of the reason I said that the money that we have is not properly accounted for. Some of it is stolen, much of it is wasted. I don't know which is more, the one that is stolen and the one that is wasted. But one thing that's sure is that the monies are not applied as they should for the purpose for which they are given. And so you have the different sorts of bailouts that never reached the people it was meant for. And there were no consequences, either from the government itself or from the people who should have been beneficiaries of that amount. So we're back to where we started in the first place. And then states, I think that it's not a very responsible thing to be a state and to be expecting to get feeding bottle from Abuja every month in, month out, and not sorting themselves out. And so it's also another bigger conversation we should be thinking about. Do we actually need 37 states in Nigeria? But then, back to the issue, I think that the states should be made to face the issue, face the consequences, and work out modalities to make it work. But in the longer term, in the midterm and longer term, I think we should look more beyond minimum wage of 30,000 naira and look at having a productive society whereby, by the way, how many people work for the government? I heard the Minister of Labor and Employment saying that the 30,000 naira is applicable also to the private sector. How realistic is that? How productive are we? The whole of last week, we probably run our lives on generator. The other side of it is insecurity and so many other policies that make life difficult for us to be productive. If we're productive, then we're productive and then we're competitive, then we can have enough monies to go around, and then we're prospering, then we can pay taxes, and then there can be money to do whatsoever we need to do. But as long as we don't focus on the main issues, we wake up one day and close the border and don't care what the fallout is going to be. Wake up one day and do things that shouldn't be done, and then look at, instead of working on areas, like I said, that enhance productivity. Let's have electricity. Let's have health. Let's have infrastructure that help us. It's not working that way. So as long as it's not that way, I think we're just going to be going round and round, and another 1 or 2 years we'll be back here having the same conversations.
Let me take you back to the budget report, which you mentioned earlier. Were you surprised to hear that only 3 states can actually fend for themselves without running to Abuja to take care of their recurrent expenditure? Were you surprised? And secondly, these state governors have repeatedly made a case for the review of the current revenue sharing formula. While there is a plan to tinker with the present formula, committees have been set up. Let's just put it out there that this is not the first time they have tried that, but it has never seen the light of day. Should these see the light of day this time around, do you think that it will ameliorate the plight of struggling states? Because currently we have a situation where the federal government gets about 52%, the state governments get 26%, and then the local governments get 20%.
In the first place, like I said earlier, I think that the state governments are looking at in the wrong direction. I think they're looking the wrong direction. We need to have a rethink and reorganize our mindsets. States ought to be raising their own funds and remitting some to the federal purse. That's the way it should be, not the other way around, if we were doing things properly in the first place. States ought to be raising their own finances. They are not doing that. And then the ones they get, they waste it. Many of the governors live in this town, in Abuja. They don't live in their states. They live very flamboyant lives. They have so many ministries that they don't need, so many commissioners, so many aides. The last time, the governor of Cross River State had 8,000 aides. So even the little money they're getting, it's being wasted. It's not applied where it should. You look at what their priorities are. They are everywhere. They're not working towards generating funds for themselves. Governors and states should not be focused on fighting for the money that is coming from the federal government. They should be organizing themselves to make their states productive, make their local governments productive, make their citizens productive, so that they can earn monies that they can use to enhance and increase the productivity and increase the quality of life. So this whole thing about arguing about who takes what share or who takes the other share, it never makes sense. It has not made sense. It will never make sense. Look at a state like Bayelsa. Bayelsa has just 8 local government areas, for goodness sake. Bayelsa, what's the population in Bayelsa? Bayelsa still gets 13% derivation funds. What happens to all the money? So I'm just using Bayelsa as an example. So it's not about more and more money. It's about how they organize themselves, where they have their priorities, and what they apply it to. So assuming that they didn't have a federal government that ought to be sending a feeding bottle to every state every month, how would they be coping? That's where everybody should be looking at. I think we're looking at the wrong direction.
Okay. Before we quickly go to a quick break, a lot of people, and what the arguments on the part of the states have always been, is the fact that what you just said just now, they take their resources and send to the federal government, is if it's a federal system. But as we know, Nigeria is not a federal system. You talk about resource control. If it was a true federal system, states should not even be getting a 13% derivation formula. They should control their resource, like oil. States like Bayelsa should do deals with the likes of Shell and some other companies like that. So states are still saying in the long run, it's quite very difficult for us to be able to properly execute. So it goes back to the conversation on federalism, on restructuring. I don't want to use the elephant word in the room. I mean, what's your take on all of this? We'll come back and talk about this more after we go for this quick commercial break. And there's a lot to talk about as regards this area you've just made mention of. All right, you're welcome back. Still the morning show here on Rise News. We're talking to Mr. Akume. I mean, I raised a very, very strong point before we went on that break. I'm sure you'd like to sound off on that. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure you'd like to sound off on the points I've raised. But when you say
indeed.
states should generate all their resources, it's very simplistic because we don't have a federal structure.
I get that. Yeah, so these are the core issues that we always run away from, and they make us come back to the same conversations every so often. First and foremost, we're called the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So are we running a federal system or we're running a unitary system? Let's tell ourselves what is. Are we a federal system or we're a unitary system? If we don't want to be a federal system, then let's stop pretending that we're a federal system. If we are, then let's do what we said we are. If we're not, then let's do what works for us. So far, we all agree that this unitary system is not working for anybody. But it promotes laziness. It gives room for the people who want to be lazy and who want to be entitled, who want to reap where they've not sown, and who want to live by rent seeking. So it keeps us where we are. But let me go back to the case of Bayelsa, which we were talking about. Like I said earlier, Bayelsa receives its normal federal allocations. Bayelsa still receives 13% derivation funds. Bayelsa is a small state, just 8 local government areas. Bayelsa has just about 1 million citizens, which means the monies that they receive every month, if it was well applied, they wouldn't be in a place where we should be hearing that they're owing workers. How many workers are in Bayelsa, by the way? So even the amount that they get is not well managed. It's not properly managed, not channeled where it should be. So it does not inspire the confidence that had they had the deals with the oil companies and raising all the monies from oil, then they can apply it where they should be applying it. The evidence doesn't show that. The other side about a state like Bayelsa is where the era of oil is going away. So when the era of oil is gone, is finally gone, and oil is not the in thing, how will the state be coping? So we're not thinking in the long term. We're not thinking even in the immediate term. We're just thinking about here and now. The monies that we have, we're not applying it well. The other one is Delta State, which itself can sustain itself according to the state-on-state report that we got during the week. But Delta State is spending 200 billion on recurrent expenditure. How does that work? So there's no transparency in the thing. There's no honesty in the thing. There's opacity around it. So even the amounts that are gotten, they are spent in ways that are not accountable. This is not sustainable. So whether they raise their monies themselves or whether they get it from the feeding bottle in Abuja, it's still the same thing. All those things need to be sorted out. And so as long as we don't sort them out, we keep going back round and talking about the same thing year in, year out.
Bringing it back to the minimum wage 5-year cycle. Now, we do know that the National Labour Congress had to basically almost threaten the government before we could even get this agreement of 30,000 naira. Now we're having the state government saying we don't have enough money for it. How, in your opinion, can we ensure a proper bargaining machinery in Nigeria and for the workers at large to make sure that this type of thing doesn't repeat itself, and to also make sure that these monies are allocated way before the 5-year cycle is over?
That takes us back to the things we were talking about earlier. The Nigerian Labour Congress, I know it tends more towards a socialist orientation of the industrial age. Labour needs to wake up and realize that we're no longer living the industrial age. We're already living the 4th industrial revolution. I mean, we're in the information age now. We're talking, their focus ought to be in the 21st century, not the 20th century. So I would prefer for Labour to be talking about things that are more sustainable, for goodness sake. Let's look at the value of the naira. We are talking about paying somebody 30,000 naira. That's 30,000 naira. If you convert it to any other currency, let's say the euro or the pound sterling or the dollar, how much is that? So we should be looking at having advocacies that make the naira more valuable, so that even if you're paid 1,000 naira a month, that 1,000 naira means so much, assuming that, let's say, 1,000 naira is $1,000, you're paid minimum, then it goes a long way. There are other things that take our monies that we shouldn't be wasting our monies on. we spend a lot of money on food. And the food is not quality food. It's not nutritious. I'll go ahead. These are things that take our money: food, water, electricity. And then there's security also. There's also unemployment. I'm quoting the Monetary Policy Committee report, the 126th meeting of last month. If we work towards fixing those things and improving the quality of life, then you don't need so much money to live a quality life. That's what we should be working towards. Because even if you're paid 100,000 naira a month, and the 100,000 naira a month you're using to buy water, you're using it to pay for your security, if a friend or relative of yours could be kidnapped and then you need to pay ransom, the money is gone already. You're paying for your health through your nose, you have terrible roads, and then we're not productive, back to what we're saying. We're not fixing things like electricity. The government itself is... Yes.
Let me just buttress the point Shaitan was trying to make, to follow up on what she said. The fact that Labour is lamenting that they bargain too hard and wait too long for the implementation of meagre increase on their wages. The way forward, there's the argument of moving perhaps the Labour issues and negotiations away from the exclusive list to the concurrent list. Do you think that this will ameliorate their plight, ensure that they don't have to, basically pass the needle through the camel's eye before they get these meagre increases?
I think that, like we've been saying, as long as we don't address the fundamental issues, the underpinning issues, we can move it from the exclusive to the concurrent and back to the exclusive. We'll still be going round and round in circles. That's the long and short of the thing. We should look at the core of the things that can make us not have to come back to the negotiating table in another fight. In fact, sometimes it's more than 5 years, and then they start fighting and going on strike and doing this and doing that. I think we don't need to be going through those rigmaroles every so often. Because the way I see it, I see us going back to this same thing again. I also see state governments trying to pretend that they cannot pay but still living large and creating new ministries and agencies and wasting monies, and nobody's holding them to account when they are owing. I also see that happening a lot, going to be happening a lot. And we're going to be round and round in circles as long as we don't increase our productivity, so increase our revenue, so the income is taxable, and then we can use it to run a system that works for everybody. As long as we're not doing that, it's not going to work. The other side of the point I'm talking about is when Labour only talks about Labour, I'm asking how many workers does the government have in Nigeria? How many people are in employ of government, for instance, or in the organized private sector? Okay, so as long as they're only focusing on one issue, we'll still be back to this same discussion again.
Mr. Akume, that's why I want to take you on this. The big concept of living wage. Because, you see, when you say minimum wage, the least you can pay anybody. But when you look at the current economic realities, it's not viable. I mean, you were trying to posit on purchasing power parity 1-to-1. Pretty much our minimum wage was 125 naira, really in the 80s. And when you look at that parity to the dollar, that was well over $200-300, because of what the naira was to the dollar. But apart from that conversation, don't you think we should have a viable thought or think tank about how much does it even take an average citizen to live in a month in this country, looking at the exigencies of bad health care, looking at the exigencies of bad infrastructure and other prevailing circumstances in the society, and pay people based on that, because it's all guesswork. At first, Labour started this conversation with over 60,000 naira. All of a sudden, it's less than that. So how much does it really take somebody to live in a month, an average life in this country? In the EU, it's been calculated to be about over 450 euros. What is it? What is that amount? And pay people based on that. And make it the minimum. What do you think?
Yeah, but that's true. That's true. That's what we should be looking at, quite frankly. I don't even think, because the problems, okay, let's even take it up from the EU where you're talking about. You're talking about 400 euros. In the UK, the minimum wage is 875 pounds or so. When you calculate the hourly rate by 40 hours a week, that's about what it is. But you can't compare Europe, the whole of Europe or the rest of the world with Nigeria. For instance, like I said earlier, when I could fall sick here, if I were elsewhere in Europe, I could collapse here. There's a number you call and the ambulance is here in a number of minutes. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen right here in Abuja where I am. So we don't have those infrastructure. The whole of last week, like I said, I ran my life just like every one of us run our lives and businesses on generator. It doesn't happen that way in Europe. You don't eat, to eat quality food, like forget about what the Minister of Agriculture said, that we eat food you can eat for 13 naira. Yes, we can eat that, but how nutritious is it? The food you eat elsewhere is nutritious and it's not expensive. And so many things are there already. 70% of us live in slums in Nigeria. 70% live in slums.
Yeah,
how many of us have access to potable water? We don't even talk about that. Yeah. Most of us, who, especially because 70% of us live in slums, we buy water from water vendors in jerry cans. Just imagine that. It's not done so. So when you factor in all of those, the living wage that those people have elsewhere in the EU countries that we're talking about, it's money they can spend. It's not money to run their systems, to pay for the neighborhood watch. To pay for this, to pay for that.
Come back and talk.
What we're talking about...
Just a minute, sir. I'll have you come back and talk about this because we're going to go to break. You said it's the money they can spend. So that begs the question. Is 30,000 enough in a bad healthcare place? Yes. And we'll be right back after this and we'll talk more on this when we come back. All right, we'll talk more about this when we come back from the break. And we'll take your views as regards this because... the healthcare sector, almost moribund, third worst in the world and the likes. We'll be right back. We'll talk some more after this. All right, we're right back. And we had a line of questioning before we went on that quick break. And I'm sure you'd like to react to all of those things we have talked about, Mr. Akume.
Indeed. So like we were saying earlier before we went on the break, when we talk about the living wage and living costs in Europe, for instance, or elsewhere, the monies that are calculated are not calculated to take care of, to pay for neighborhood watch, to buy for water, to pay for your health, which you don't have access to compensate for terrible roads and to pay for run your generator and do all of those. Those are monies to put in your pocket to run your life. And then there's systems already in place in case there's an emergency. This is a number to call. You're going to have attention. And I said that these are the things that improve the quality of life. I think that these are the things we should be working towards in Nigeria in the mid and long term. An increase in income is only one subset of improving the quality of life, because if you take our minimum wage to 100,000 naira, how much is 100,000 naira? 100,000 naira, how much is it if you convert it to dollars? It's still nothing. It's still nothing, quite frankly. But then if our naira had value, then it could be 1,000 naira you're earning, but it can take care of a lot of things. On the one hand, that's talking about the value of the naira. On the other hand, we're talking about if our quality of life is improved, then you don't have to, there aren't so many leakages here and there that collect our money. So that at the end of the day, you collect your money, you see it, but it's of no value to you because it's already going. It increases the hardship, makes life more difficult for us. So we always need, and then even without that, because there's an inflation, the economy is growing and things are moving, you need to increase that wage. So like I'm saying right now, even with this 30,000 naira, assuming that it were 60,000 naira, how many people is this thing covering in the first place? Assuming that they even had 60,000 naira, what can that do? So we need to look at a more holistic solution than talking about wage and fighting for it and somebody saying they can pay, they can't pay, and then we fight till it's time for another increment. Earlier I had said that the government already undermines its own policies and then makes life more difficult for us. Please let me cite just one example, or let me just use just one agency of the government, the Nigerian Customs Service. The Nigerian Customs Service closed all our land borders, and the government has been promoting the propaganda that because we closed our borders, our rice production has increased and is going to promote rice farming in Nigeria. That is false. That is not true. So we cannot use falsehood to promote what we want. Please let me make the point.
To have
no. I'm tying it. Please let me tie the point.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. So what the point I'm making is, Nigeria, we consume 6.9 million tons of rice a year. We only produce 3.5, which means there's 3.2 that we cannot have. Right now that we don't have enough, it means that the price is going to increase. That's where I'm going to.
Okay.
So when you were negotiating to have 30,000 naira, a bag of rice was at so and so price. Now that you have it, the price has increased, which means the monies you have gone already. And then we have so many taxes that are coming now that the little money you have now go to all the taxes. So it's just we're going round and round in circles, quite frankly.
Indeed. Thank you so much for coming on the morning show today on Arise News. We do appreciate your presence. Thank you very much. The minimum wage never ends.
Oh yeah.
It's a sad situation that we have these deliberations, negotiations, and yet the workers are still not paid. And even when they are paid, it's all eroded by inflation.
I can tell you for free that a couple of years down the line, we'll still have this conversation again. People still have this negotiation.